With headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. It's been another busy week in Westminster. It's 4 years on since Brexit. Are we beginning to see the benefits of our exit from Europe? It looks like things are moving ahead in Northern Ireland, but only time will tell. Labour has been busy trying to woo big business, while the Conservatives are back focusing on illegal immigration again. I'll be grilling the Education Secretary, Gillian Coogan, about her new apprenticeship scheme encouraging 18-year-olds to go straight back into the classroom as teachers. I'll be speaking to the Shadow Minister for Creative Industries and Digital, Nigel Farage's nemesis, Sir Chris Bryant. Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, will be joining me live in the studio. I'll be asking for her reaction to the latest immigration figures and trying to get to the bottom of whether she is plotting against Rishi Sunak to take over the Tory leadership. I'll also be joined in the studio by former Tory donor Lord Farmer to ask him why the party is abandoning the family after a shocking survey published today has revealed 8 in 10 families think that the government is family unfriendly. And the People's Panel is back by popular demand. 4 years on from Brexit, has it been a success? In election year, we want to hear from you, our loyal GB viewers, and allow you to have your say on our show. Well, let's get straight into the Sunday morning papers with Anna Mikhailova, the Deputy Political Editor and columnist on The Mail on Sunday. Anna, lovely to see you this morning. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've obviously seen these Air Force deployed again in the Middle East, while at the same time, a lot of the papers this morning are featuring this report about how underdefended or defenceless we actually are. Talk us through it.
So the Defence Committee of MPs has published a landmark report pretty shockingly saying that the armed forces are simply not ready for a war. Obviously, there's been speculation that there might be a war with Russia on the horizon. There's a lot going on in the Middle East. I mean, last night it was almost looking like we might get pulled into the American action against Iran.
Yes.
That did not happen. Instead, there were more bombings against the Houthis in Yemen. But it's just such a tinderbox situation there. And at the same time, back home, we've got this report saying that the armed forces are just not ready. One of the findings is that while there was extra funding promised in the last budget, about nearly £2 billion, all of that's done is gone into plug shortfalls. So it's not actually investing in the new capability that people say we actually need.
And when we question Grant Shapps about this, I know you have and I have, you know, it's kind of like nothing to see here, everything's OK. But there are legitimate concerns among former army and other generals, aren't there, that we aren't quite ready. And then there's also concerns, I mean, perhaps it would be seen as too much of an escalation, but we're sending these aircraft out from about 3,000 miles away when we have got 2 aircraft carriers that could be sent to the Red Sea. Why do you think Shapps doesn't want to do that?
Well, maybe it would be seen as a possible stepping up. I think there is a real concern that what is going on in the Middle East right now really has the risk of tipping over into wider war, and no one wants that. So I think that is probably why. With Grant Shapps and Rishi Sunak, it's important to point out that when they rather recently ran for the Conservative leadership, both pledged increasing spending on defence as a proportion of GDP. Of course, while in government, both are constrained by the actual state of finances. But I think a conversation probably does need to be had in the context of the current geopolitical situation of actually probably funding more.
Exactly. I think Ben Wallace wanted 3%. It's currently at 2.25, according to an interview I did with Shapps a couple of weeks ago. Let's move on to kind of a tripartite of interventions. We've got James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, in the Sun on Sunday, talking about the interference, really, of bishops with regard to not just the Rwanda bill, but also this recent chemical attack. We've also got Priti Patel and Suella Braverman, who's coming into the studio in just a moment to speak to me about this and other matters, also saying that churches shouldn't be getting involved in asylum claims. Do you agree with that, Anna?
Well, the point about churches is obviously off the back of the horrific attack in Clapham, where it turns out, despite being twice rejected for asylum by the Home Office, the attacker was then granted was allowed to stay in the country by a tribunal based on some evidence, it appears, where a priest vouched for him and said he had converted to Christianity. So
at the last minute, really. I mean, I can't quite understand this. One can understand that somebody could claim asylum on the back of being a Christian and fearing persecution in their own country. We know that there are a lot of cases of Christian persecution in the Middle East. However, this is at the last minute, and there are other examples in the papers of this being used, I think, as a ruse.
Well, so Suella Braverman, in her article in Telegraph, says that when she was shocked when she got to the Home Office, and says that this happens on an industrial scale, she claims, that churches effectively, that in certain communities, people know which churches to approach and help
find a friendly bishop. Yes.
The churches do deny this. They say, is this more a problem of the church almost wanting to, in a time when no one really wants to go to church, being sort of desperate for anyone?
Yeah, anyone who comes and converts, they're happy with.
So whether or not they're doing it knowingly is debatable. But Alan Mendoza, for example, has an op-ed. He runs the Henry Jackson Society. He has an interesting article in today's papers saying that there's actually no data on conversions to Christianity in asylum claims. So at the very least, we should be gathering the numbers to see whether or not this is a trend. Because all we have is these anecdotal examples like this, the Liverpool bomber.
Yeah, it'd be good to know the numbers, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Just very quickly on James Cleverly, I mean, he's not holding back on Justin Welby, is he? Archbishop warned on evil smugglers, basically making the point, you're on the wrong side here.
Yes, and Justin Welby has been in the House of Lords criticising the Rwanda bill. He makes no secret that he's against the Rwanda bill. One of the problems the church has, people will say, is that they both don't want to be criticised about getting involved in these asylum claims, but also are so incredibly political over things like Rwanda that perhaps being political in this way and showing so obviously which side they're,
I mean, shouldn't the clergy be apolitical so that they're representing parishioners who might be both for Rwanda and against? It's a strange conundrum. Let's move on to that other broad church, the Conservatives, because there's an interesting poll which is featured in almost all of the papers, but particularly the Sun on Sunday, says Penny's a winner in polls. So Penny Mordaunt is now the most popular successor to Rishi Sunak. Meanwhile, we read in the Sunday Times that Nigel Farage, of all people, my GB News fellow presenter, is going to be attending the launch of this popular conservatism comeback that's being spearheaded by Liz Truss. Very quick thought on Penny. I mean, we had Kemi Badenoch in here last week. She gave a good account of herself. I'm obviously going to be speaking speaking to Suella Braverman shortly, and she's another leadership contender. But Penny Mordaunt, is she the answer to the Tories' woes, do you think?
Well, the grassroots do really like her, and it's not surprising that she's topped a poll because she has, in the recent past, been a favourite with Conservative Party members. And I think she's taken quite a tough stance on defence recently. She's made points about the Navy and the need to
as a former Defence Secretary, albeit briefly.
Exactly. So I think she maybe has won some popularity there. But popcorn, yes, that will be one of the political moments of this week. Nigel Farage is apparently attending in his capacity as the GBNews presenter.
Is he? OK, so journalistically he's attending, although we know he was at the Tory party conference. He went to another event featuring Liz Truss. What's Liz Truss up to, Anna, do you think?
I think she's knowingly stirring the pot, would be the technical term for it. I think Liz Truss obviously knows that she has no future in a return leadership bid, but she makes no secret that she would probably like to be in a position of kingmaker in any future.
I was going to say kingmaker rather than comeback queen, I think, is probably the best idea. You interviewed Gillian Keegan in your newspaper, The Mail, on Sunday. I've got her coming up in just a moment. Is she a leadership contender, do you think?
She is cited as one of the leadership contenders, but still the ones in the lead are definitely Kemi Badenoch, Penny Mordaunt. But as you know, with leadership contests, the ones who are the front runners at the beginning don't always end up being the front runners at the end.
Yes, indeed so. And just a very final point, because we're running out of time. There's an interesting sort of dual story in the Sunday Times talking about how we're in this slightly perverse situation that Keir Starmer is being sort of more strong on Israel than Lord Cameron, our Foreign Secretary. Cameron calling for Palestine to be recognised as a state. Starmer's not willing to go that far. Is this going to cost Labour Muslim votes, do you think?
Well, it is already costing Labour Muslim votes, and Rochdale, the by-election in Rochdale, will be an interesting one to watch because George Galloway is standing there. So that will be this month, and also other prominent Labour MPs are being challenged by Palestinian activists. The Sunday Times quotes a Labour MP saying that Cameron has, quote, outflanked us on Palestine, which they think is hemorrhaging both traditional Labour voters and Muslim voters.
Very, very interested indeed. Thank you very much for that, Anna. Now, as I have said, the People's Panel is back. Catherine Forster is in Grays with our People's Panel this morning. Don't forget, this is the opportunity that you have to share your views on the interviews that I'm going to do on the show, in general, what you think of today's politics and all the rest of it. So we do want you to keep applying because we're bringing it back with a vengeance. Catherine, what's the main topic of conversation in Essex this morning?
Yes, good morning, Camilla, and welcome to the King's Arms here in Orsett. That's quite close to Grays in Essex. I've got the manager, Jade, with me. Jade, thanks so much for hosting us today. How's business?
Yeah, business is great. Yeah, we've got lots of loyal customers.
That's good to hear. So we've been having a lot of chat here this morning. Immigration, as you will be not surprised, given the man on the run, is very high on the agenda. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the panel today. Terry, I'm going to start with you. You are a retired bank manager. You've got a couple of questions for the MPs coming on today, haven't you?
If I can, please. To Gillian, why is it that teachers seem to be more working in line with the sort of care and mental health sector rather than actually teaching the pupils? And to Suella, why is it that the legal profession seems to help illegal immigrants more than those who should be and wanting to come to this country legally? Let's take the Afghans who've helped our soldiers. They can't come in. Yeah, an Afghan can have help 3 times, come into this country, get asylum, and then go on to commit a horrible act, and is now on the run. The legal profession doesn't seem to have a degree of balance.
Thank you for those. Steve, I'll come to you next. You are the prospective parliamentary candidate for Basildon and Billericay for the Reform Party. You're largely retired property developer. What are your questions for the MPs today?
Very, very similar to the first question. In light of the illegal immigrant, which is now a legal migrant in this country, which threw the alkalised substance in a woman's face, which is most probably oven cleaner because it's very easy to get and it is alkali, and that would cause substantial damage. In light of that,
something that happened to you 50 years ago.
Well, not me directly, but my class. The racks, which is reinforced, autoclaved, aerated concrete. This system shut down 231 schools which currently got this. One of the schools which came to light was All Saints. That's in Stepney. That was shut down completely. Nobody was allowed to go to school there. I'm sure it's still shut down. That was previously Sir John Cass Foundation of Redcoat. I went to that school, and would you believe 50 years ago, on the 8th of February 1974, my class was in a swimming pool. The girls were in the swimming pool. 2 tiles fell off the roof. They were told to get out of the pool, and the entire concrete ceiling, the entire structure fell into the pool. That would have caused major atrocities. But what I'd like to know is, why has it been shut down 50 years later? Did they put all those children's lives in jeopardy over the last 50 years? I'd like an answer to that.
That's a very shocking story, heavens. And finally to you, Paul, you are also a retired bank manager, also an author and an ex-school governor. You've got questions for the politicians as well, haven't you?
I do. With personal and national debt at record levels, why isn't personal finance being taught in schools as part of the national curriculum? And my second one is, how have successive Conservative governments allowed our armed forces to get to the state where they're having to decommission Royal Navy ships through lack of staff?
Very pertinent questions. And yes, I mean, financial education in schools, you'd think, a lot of people would think would be a very obvious thing to introduce, wouldn't you? So that's it from us. Camilla, we'll be really interested to hear what Gillian Keegan and Suella Braverman have to say on these issues. But for now, back to you in the studio.
And to Catherine for being there in Grays in Essex. Now, don't go anywhere, because as billed, I'll be speaking to the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, just after this weather bulletin.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, very good morning to you. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It is quite a damp, drab and dreary start to Sunday for most of us, all thanks to this warm front that is slowly pushing its way north-eastwards across the UK, so particularly now for Northern Ireland, Northern England and into Scotland there is outbreaks of rain spreading their way in. Some drizzle also to contend with across Wales, southwest England, but generally for central eastern areas it will be a touch drier, reasonably cloudy, but a few sunnier breaks perhaps developing into the afternoon. Very blustery for many of us, some quite strong gusts around coast and over the hills, but those winds are coming in from a southwesterly direction, feeding in some very mild air for the time of year. It remains rather cloudy for much of Northern Ireland, England and Wales overnight, but we'll see persistent rain moving its way in for Scotland, particularly western districts turning very wet here. As it moves into some colder air ahead of it, we could see some hill snow, and the far north of Scotland will have a chillier night to come with a touch of frost, but elsewhere it is going to stay very mild indeed. For much of the southern two-thirds of the UK, again, it is going to be a fairly drizzly and cloudy day on Monday. Perhaps a few outbreaks of brightness poking their way through at times, but it really is Scotland that's going to bear the brunt of the most persistent rainfall. Some areas in the west perhaps seeing 120 millimetres build up by the end of the day. We hold on to that mild theme in the south throughout the rest of this week, but we'll see something a bit chillier arrive in the north later on. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lovely to have your company this Sunday morning. We're just waiting for Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, to be ready for the interview. I'm going to bring Anna Mihailova back into the conversation. She's the Deputy Political Editor and columnist for The Mail on Sunday. Anna, let's speak to you about Gillian Keegan a little further, because you interviewed her in the week. I mean, what's she like? She has this kind of, you know, I'm a working class girl, done good kind of shtick about her. She's talked about the fact that she didn't do a degree, she did an apprenticeship degree, which presumably has also inspired this announcement from the government. They're going to bring in teaching apprentices. I suppose I would ask the question of that policy. Does that mean that you're going to effectively have teenagers teaching teenagers?
I think it's open from 18, so in theory you could have... but I think the aim, from my understanding from her, is that it's about opening up the number of people who can be teachers. It's about training up, skilling up existing teaching assistants who currently realistically can't really go leave their jobs, do the training that's needed, so it allows them to keep working while studying for a teaching job.
I mean, Gillian Keegan is extremely close to Rishi Sunak, isn't she? Presumably she is one of the loyalists who is telling him to stick with the plan. I mean, is this plan working as far as you can see, Anna? That's the Prime Minister's whole kind of impetus. Whenever he goes on the telly, he says, I'm sticking to my 5-point plan, and yet he still is tanking in the polls. On the other hand, I guess, Downing Street doesn't have much choice but to stick with that plan.
I think their big hope and their attempt, as we've seen at the start of this year, is to really reframe the conversation onto the economy, because they think that's where they have the highest chance of some green shoots appearing. They assume that inflation will go down further, possibly towards 2% again, that the Bank of England will finally start cutting rates. Whether or not that'll actually have any impact on people's pockets, because as we all know, we're still going to the shops, prices are still rising, even though the headline rate is falling.
And also we had this extraordinary briefing this week that actually Jeremy Hunt isn't going to cut tax much after all.
Oh, it was classic, wasn't it? So first he started off the year really strong, saying this is all going to be a tax-cutting budget, and then surprise, surprise, then he has to temper expectations. It's all about expectation management. So on the one hand, they want their MPs and their voters to hope that there will be some tax cuts and to expect them, because that is still the plan. But at the same time, if you promise people too much and you can't actually deliver because you don't have the amount of money to play with, if everyone's suddenly expecting, 2p off income tax and they can't deliver it, then that expectation management will have been badly done.
Anna, I think Gillian Keegan is with us now. Minister, lovely to speak to you this morning. Thank you very much for making the time. I've just been discussing with my newspaper guest there your plan for teacher apprentices. I suppose that does beg the question whether we are going to have the prospect of teenagers teaching teenagers.
Well, I mean, we already have work placements going in to do the work placements at various age, but no, that's not the intention. About 70% of all the occupations in this country now you can access through an apprenticeship scheme. So we have completely revolutionised apprenticeships in this country, and they're also available to people of all ages. So if you want to be a space engineer or an accountant or a medical doctor, almost any job you can think of, you can now do it via an apprenticeship. And what I wanted to do is also bring that to teaching, because what you get is you broaden the amount of people who can access teaching. So those young people who want to do a degree apprenticeship, like I did all those years ago, can access a degree apprenticeship, teaching degree apprenticeship, and skip the student debt, so they'll earn and learn at the same time. But also for older people who may decide, you know what, this is a fantastic second career, I can give something back. Or there's we've got 59,000 more teaching assistants than we had in 2010. Some of them would make fantastic teachers. So we just want to make the routes into the profession easier for them and more supportive if you need to earn and as well at the same time as you're learning.
Although presumably these teaching apprentices will have to have studied maths to 18, because Rishi Sunak is expecting children to study maths to 18.
Well, they will be studying Maths to 18 in the future, but the teaching degree apprenticeship, which will start in September 2025 with people taking it, that has a lot of subject expertise. So we've worked with all the institutes, with maths, with physics, with science, and all of the societies, the expert groups, to make sure that we have enough of the subject matter in there, because that's one of the things you need to do. Have the subject matter, but also have the pedagogy, have the ability to know how and what to learn in what stages.
But they might not be
what they've all been working on.
But they might not be the mathematicians that Rishi Sunak is hoping for in the classroom.
They'll be fantastic mathematicians and probably far better than you or I, and they will definitely be able to teach up to the right standard and beyond the standard as well.
Okay.
So yes, of course, that's been one of the reasons we've had people working on this, to make sure that it has the right sort of subject knowledge, and we'll do the same for others, computer science, physics, particularly where there's shortage occupations, because it is very difficult to compete with computer science graduates when basically the whole of the world's trying to employ them.
Yeah.
So we have seen that we have some shortages in some of the subjects, because it is difficult to compete, and you could never, even though we've got the starting salaries now, I'm really proud to say up to £30,000, you're never going to compete with some of these massive tech companies.
Can I put...
is as we do go to Maths to 18, and we've been working with people to understand what that looks like in terms of curriculum, I think there's a real opportunity to do more on financial education. We do some of the basics, and we do use examples actually from the real world in many of the maths teaching, but I think that is a really good question for Maths to 18 as to what more we could do on financial education. Lots of children say that they would like to have more.
You'll be familiar with the case of the Michaela school in Brent, which is currently facing a high court challenge from a pupil over the ability for Muslim pupils to pray in the playground. The head teacher there, Catherine Burble-Singh, has tried to stop that. It's not right, is it, for Muslim children to expect to pray in the playground of a secular school?
Well, of course, I can't comment on the case because there is a legal case. But that school, and Catherine in general, has done an amazing job. The school is a true success, and most people who go to that school really, I mean, it's very, very highly sought after school. So really, really appreciate getting a place in that school. And the school has their policies, and they've made their policies clear. But
in principle,
on a live
praying
case,
in the playground in a secular school.
Well, I mean, this is, again, for schools, that schools know their own sort of cohorts properly. So some schools may have, well, they may have provision for that, and some may not.
But this is a secular school.
We have a lot of autonomy in our schools. Well, again, it's the head teacher who will set their policies. We have a lot of autonomy in our schools, and the head teacher has very clearly set a policy here, but that policy is being challenged through the courts.
We had some polling from YouGov in the Telegraph a couple of weeks ago. It made a bit of a splash. Ms Keegan, you'll have been familiar with it. It actually predicted that you might lose your Chichester seat. Is that a real prospect, and how are you preparing for that?
You can never, ever take the electorate for granted. I always prepare. I go out every Saturday. I took a leaf out of Theresa May's book and go out on a Saturday, meet people. Actually, it keeps you super grounded. You get to know what they think about national issues and also local issues. And it's actually a part of the job that I actually love. I also did a pub tour, which I do. I've done quite often, but I've reintroduced them because we had some security concerns about them. But I did one on Friday night. And again, it was just lovely to say to everybody, if you want to discuss politics, if you want to have a pie and a pint at the same time, just come down, ask me anything.
So you're confident you can win that seat?
Lots and lots of insights from people. Oh, I mean, I'm confident I'll give it my very best. It's all I ever do in life, and you know, sometimes it works out, sometimes it don't, but usually it does.
All right. Thank you very much, Gillian Keegan, for joining us this morning. Lovely to speak to you. Lots more to come in the next hour. Of course, I'm going to be joined by the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. She's going to be live in the studio. You won't want to miss that, because I'm going to be asking her about asylum, the Rwanda bill, leadership, and what she really thinks of Rishi Sunak. So do not move a muscle. Stay tuned. We'll be back with Braverman next.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. So much more to come in the next hour. We've got Suella Braverman in the studio and the Shadow Minister for Creative Industries and Digital, Sir Chris Bryant. But first, here's the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Hello there, very good morning to you. It is 10 o'clock, I'm Aaron Armstrong. The UK and the United States have launched a fresh wave of attacks on Houthi targets in Yemen. 36 sites across 13 locations were hit by coalition forces in response to continued attacks on ships in the Red Sea. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps says the third round of joint strikes is not an escalation. Instead, it's designed to protect innocent lives and preserve freedom of navigation. The Houthis, an Iran-backed militant group, has vowed to retaliate. Former chairman of Defence Select Committee Tobias Ellwood says Britain was right to take further action.
Our economy and our security are symbiotically interconnected. As we see in the Red Sea, if we don't protect those international shipping lanes, if we don't step forward with other nations, then our way of life is now challenged because of these errant nations taking advantage of our ever-wobbly international rules-based order. Britain does step up. That's who we are as a nation, and we need to start doing it again.
A man's been arrested on suspicion of dangerous dog offences following the death of a woman in Essex. Police were called to a property in Jaywick where they found a woman with serious injuries. She died at the scene. It's thought she was attacked by two dogs. Both were later destroyed. The breed of the animals has yet to be determined. A 39-year-old man remains in custody. The man suspected of a chemical attack continues to evade police. Officers say they are following various lines of inquiry after receiving dozens of calls about Abdul Ezedi, including possible sightings. He was last caught on camera at London's King's Cross station heading south. A woman remains in hospital after suffering what's thought to be life-changing injuries. Protesters climbing war memorials could face 3 months in prison and a fine of £1,000. Pro-Palestine protesters scaled the Royal Artillery Memorial in London following a demonstration outside Parliament in November. The Home Secretary, James Cleverly's, described it as an insult and says it cannot continue. The measure will apply across England and Wales and is set to be introduced in the House of Commons. Now, if you want more on all of our stories, you can do the following. Scan the QR code on your screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, it's back to Camilla.
Welcome back. Still lots more to come. In just a minute, I'm going to be joined by Shadow Minister for Creative Industries and Digital, Sir Chris Bryant, as immigration forecasts this week have predicted that we will add 6 million. You heard that correctly, 6 million to the UK population by 2036. Has Rishi Sunak made a mistake by sacking the woman who is clamping down on immigration? Will the Prime Minister even make it to the next general election? I'll be asking his former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, for her thoughts. I'll also be joined by Conservative peer and former Treasury of the Conservative Party, Lord Farmer. Are the Tories abandoning the family? And we'll get the verdict live from our People's Panel in Grays. Now, earlier on, I spoke with Shadow Minister for Creative Industries and Digital, Sir Chris Bryant MP for Rhondda. Here's what he had to say. Bryant joins me now. He's the Labour MP for Rhondda, who's Shadow Minister for Creative Industries and Digital. Love you this morning, Mr Bryant. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's talk about some of Labour's policies then. We understand that you are going to have a bomb-proof manifesto, but it's perhaps conspicuous by its absence what's not in it. The Green Prosperity Pledge is being watered down. There's now going to be no mention of this 28 billion. There's going to be no new National Care Service. You're not going to be scrapping the Lords, having promised that for decades. You're only going to get rid of 90-odd hereditary peers. I mean, is this evidence that Labour can't stick to its promises even when not in power?
Camilla, I'm afraid you've been reading the newspapers and believing everything you read in them. None of that is true. We are certainly committed to our £28 billion Green Prosperity Plan because we want to make sure that we can protect our energy security in this country. We want to be able to capitalise on the jobs of the future for British people. We want to set up Great British Energy. We want to make all of that happen. Yes, sure, it's an ambitious commitment, but we are determined to make it happen. I can't tell you what day of what week it's going to happen, but for that matter, if you had Jeremy Hunt on here now, he wouldn't be able to tell you what the tax rates are going to be in 6 weeks' time or at the end of the year, or let alone what he's going to be spending in 2028, 2029. So, look, we want to be a credible government. That means no more inventing 6 impossible things before breakfast, no more gimmicks, serious, credible, practicable policies. We haven't published our manifesto yet. We will publish it later on this year when the general election comes. But yes, of course, we're going to be reforming the House of Lords. There are lots of different stages that there will have to be to that. Of course we are. We don't believe that the way that the House of Lords is presently constituted is right. Why on earth is Michelle Mone a member of the House of Lords? How on earth have we ended up with more than 800 members of the House of Lords? Why on earth is it possible when the committee that says
why not
such
scrap
and such
it
a person
completely
is not
then?
a suitable person to go to the House of Lords, that the Prime Minister completely overrides it? Well, because I'm in favour of having a second chamber, and I think it should be a proper reflection of the whole of the United Kingdom, the nations and the regions, different parts of the country, rather than just very focused on London and the South East. It shouldn't just be a set of cronies appointed by Prime Ministers. You should have a proper process, and I would prefer to see it elected. But that is a massive piece of constitutional change which will take some time to deliver.
OK, but isn't one of the problems for Starmer is that he can't really scrap the whole of the Lords, because then how would he do favours for his friends and supporters? How would we then have the prospect of a future Lord Brown or a future Lord Blair or a future Lord who might have been a trade union baron who supported Labour? That's the problem, isn't it, Mr Bryant?
Good try, Camilla. I think you'll find that Tony Blair and Gordon Brown could have had a seat in the House of Lords many years ago if they'd ever wanted one. Look, the truth is, but honestly, that's not the plan. And wouldn't it be a good idea if we stopped any Prime Minister having a resignation honours list so that they can just bung their old mates who've done them favours over the years into the House of Lords, into the legislature for life? We want to change the House of Lords. Of course, it's going to be tough. You may not recall, but 100 years ago, Camilla, I know you can't remember this, but 100 years ago, in 1924, when there was the first Labour government, we only had 4 members of the House of Lords who were Labour Party members. So it was difficult to deliver what we wanted to be able to do. We are trying to put together a manifesto that is not only...
It applies to both sides, doesn't it? Lord Mandelson wasn't democratically elected. Labour have ennobled as many of their own friends and cronies as the Tories have, haven't they? I mean, do you want an elected chamber or not?
Well, sorry. Sorry, Camilla, the numbers, you're quite wrong about the numbers. I think there are now 287 Conservative members of the House of Lords. There are 194, I might be slightly wrong, 194 crossbenchers and 170 or so
Well, that's
Labour
because the Tories have been in power more than Labour, isn't it?
I believe... well, actually, David Cameron was the fastest appointer of members of the House of Lords that there's ever been in our history. But look, the point is, we want to bring about change. We know that our constitution is creaking at the edges, and we need to bring about change. But it's got to be, we've got to be a credible government, and that means, first of all, we want to grow the economy. We know that one of the problems that we've had over the last 14 years is that we've not capitalised on the bits of the economy that we're good at. So, for instance, the creative industries, which have grown faster than any other part of the economy. We need to grow our economy as fast as we can. We need to build 1.5 million more homes. We need to make sure that people have access to energy, which is why we want to set up the Great British Energy Company, which is owned by the British people and is providing clean energy for people and ensures our energy security in this country.
Okay.
And yes, we want to change the social care system in this country. But look, it would be irresponsible to be a government that simply invented 6 impossible things before breakfast, like the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland.
Okay.
What we need to do is be a government that is credible, not like Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng.
No, fair enough. Look, I know you want to be a credible government. Would it be credible, for instance, Mr. Bryant, knowing how critical you have been of the former US president in the past, would it be competent and indeed credible, should Donald Trump come to power, that Keir Starmer is perhaps a future Prime Minister while Donald Trump is a future president? He invites him to the UK, and then you, presumably, as you did in 2017, will call for Donald Trump to be arrested.
Look, I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump, and I make no bones about that. I don't think that somebody who denies the result of a general election is a good Democrat.
But Starmer might have to work with this bloke.
Indeed, and I remember when I worked in the Foreign Office as a Foreign Office Minister for about 10 minutes under Gordon Brown, that sometimes you have to deal with people who are not your immediate, obvious allies, and that's just part of what you have to do as a country and being a grown-up government. So if Donald Trump gets elected, you know, that's up to the American people. Just
so you won't be calling for him to be arrested on arrival into the UK?
I won't, no.
Can I ask you a question in your former guise?
What's your view? Camilla, tell me, Camilla, what's your view about Donald Trump? Do you think somebody who has sought to mount an insurrection against a democratically elected president is the right person to lead America?
I don't usually answer the questions here, but as you've asked, I think that the Americans are facing a Hobson's choice between a man who may be under a custodial sentence by the time of the next presidential election and a man who can't finish a sentence, Mr. Bryant. So I think they're troubled either way. Can we move on very briefly to bishops and Church of England bishops? Because you used to be a Church of England priest. I wondered what you made of the various interventions that have been made by bishops, not only over the Rwanda bill, but also, as we learn in this recent case, of bishops getting involved in saying that asylum seekers are facing the threat of persecution because they have converted to Christianity, only for that to prove to be not to be true, and actually it's allowed quite dangerous people to remain in this country. Should bishops butt out, Mr. Bryant?
If I can separate out the two different issues. First of all, I welcome bishops taking part in the political debate. I welcome anybody of whatever faith and religion taking part in the debate in Britain. And I think you know, the Church of England has a specific responsibility to do so. Personally, I would take bishops out of the House of Lords. I don't quite understand why we still have something which only refers to the Church of England rather than all the other faiths in the United Kingdom. And I would prefer people to be elected to the second chamber rather than appointed. And you know, as you say, I used to be a priest in the Church of England. I think actually Anglican clergy would say that once you're anointed as a priest, you're a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. But I read the Bible in a different way from many other conservatives. I would say that, you know, his first sermon was, he said that I have been anointed to preach good news to the poor, to set the people free. So I know that people read the Bible in different ways, and I welcome that. When it comes to the issue of asylum, I do look at this horrific acid attack this week, and I want to go, I'm sorry, I don't want to undermine the particular tribunal, but I have no idea, if all the facts that we've been told from the papers are true, how on earth that person was granted asylum. So yes, of course, we've always got to look at the rules to make sure that fundamentally we, the British people, are safe.
OK, Mr Bryant, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Lovely to speak to you. That was Chris Bryant earlier, giving us a little bit of a Sunday sermon, which was a little unexpected, but good nonetheless. Now, don't move a muscle, because in just a minute, I'll be talking to the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Could she be the future Tory leader? Stay tuned.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debate, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm delighted to be joined now by the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, MP for Fareham, in the studio, live and dangerous. No, not necessarily. It's interesting because I haven't actually spoken to you at length since your resignation. Let's just go back to that moment if we can, because it's still probably fresh in people's memories. I mean, you were quite critical of Rishi Sunak and the government in your resignation letter. I suppose the general impression that people were given was that you might have been... I appreciate you resigned, but you might have been forced out because you were too right-wing.
Actually, I think
that is my assessment of it, actually, or too honest. You know, I approach the role as Home Secretary as a privilege. It's always a privilege to take these jobs. And I wanted to make a difference. I really wanted to do what was necessary to stop the boats, because I know the British people really care about that. I really wanted to limit legal migration. I really wanted to improve policing. And I saw it as an opportunity to be really honest for the British people, even if that was going to be difficult, even if that might make me unpopular. And I think that jarred with the Prime Minister, and ultimately we had too many disagreements on policy, whether it was relating to migration, policing or other matters. And so, you know, a working relationship can't really survive in those circumstances.
I mean, it was kind of preluded by a pretty difficult week for you. You were criticised for your comments about homelessness, sort of likening it to a lifestyle choice. You were criticised for saying that the police had played favourites when it came to the pro-Palestinian marches. Do you regret any of that in hindsight?
Well, what I would say is, I mean, I didn't say that homelessness is a lifestyle
Clarify
choice.
that for us.
What I actually said was that people who are homeless require a huge amount of compassion and support. And that's why I'm really proud that we have a massive package of holistic resources to help people who fall on hard times and who need support to get back on track with their lives, whether it's to deal with their mental health problems, to deal with addiction problems, to deal with housing or employment matters. But there's also an element that we can't shy away from, which is that there's a cohort of people who are refusing offers of accommodation by the council. So are you saying that
they are therefore choosing to be homeless?
Who are using tents for criminality, such as prostitution or drug dealing, and who are causing antisocial behaviour and criminality in their communities. I've seen it in my community, in my constituency. The council has worked for years to try and get these people off the streets, offers of accommodation repeatedly, offers of help, refused time and time again. And in those circumstances, a firm but fair approach is needed. And I think that's another example of where honesty can sometimes get you into trouble.
I mean, with regard to the police, is it right for a Home Secretary to be that critical of the police and how they're carrying out operations, the Met?
Well, again, I don't think I actually did, you know, interfere in any operational decisions.
Playing favourites, you still stand by that? Do you think they are playing favourites and that they're favouritising, I guess, pro-Palestinians over Jews and Israelis?
Well, what we've seen, and let's look at the facts, is now months of hateful marches taking place as a regular fixture on the streets of Britain. We've seen people chanting jihad and the police turning a blind eye.
There's very many different reasons for explanations for jihad, apparently.
That was a low point for me when the Met Police came out and justified the chanting of jihad. They had some people who were extremists actually advising them in the heart of their team. We've seen London and other cities become no-go areas for Jewish people now on a regular basis. We've seen flagrant and brazen anti-Semitism, which has now become normalised.
So should these marches have been stopped? Should they be stopped? You've got this sort of tug-of-war going on, as far as I can tell, between the Met Police saying, oh, well, we can't stop them, and the government saying, yeah, you can, you have got the power. Have they got the power to stop them?
Yes. The law is very clear that this is a decision that has to be initiated by the Met Police. And so when I was Home Secretary, I was in a real tussle with the police.
So you're saying to Mark Rowley, you've got to stop these marches, and he's saying what?
I made it clear that my view was that the march should not have gone ahead on Armistice Day. That day of deep reverence, national significance, was almost sacrosanct.
But in
It shouldn't have
general,
gone
I mean,
ahead.
is there an argument to say, look, you've made your point now, you shouldn't be marching at all?
I think, actually, there is a case for giving ministers, the Home Secretary, more powers to ban a march. What happened was I was powerless in law. I didn't have a power to ban that march on Armistice Day. It was down to the Met Police. I believe they made the wrong decision. I said so.
But we've heard this quite a lot. I mean, even under Cressida Dick's reign, this idea that the police and the Home Office are somehow at loggerheads. Is that the reality of the situation at times?
Actually, no. I had a very good working relationship with the police. And I'm pro-police. Except on that issue, I felt I needed to speak up for the British people and be honest about it. I backed the police with one of the largest pay settlements that they got. I backed the police on improving their powers when it came to disciplining rogue police officers. I increased their powers when it came to protesters and militant disruptors on our streets. So I was pro-police as a Home Secretary, But I also felt that the quid pro quo for that was also to challenge them when they were getting it wrong.
Have you spoken to Rishi Sunak since you left office?
That's a good question. I don't think so, no.
And in your resignation letter, you talked about someone needing to be honest. Your plan is not working. We have endured record election defeats. Your resets have failed, and we are running out of time. You need to change course urgently. What does that mean, change course? Change leader? I mean, what did you make, for instance, because it was almost like your resignation letter was a forerunner for Simon Clarke's op-ed in The Telegraph last week calling for Sunak to step down and be replaced. Does he need to step down and be replaced?
The Prime Minister's not going anywhere. Rishi Sunak's going to be leading us into the general election. But what I do believe strongly is that, and every poll that we see day after day is confirming it, is that we're heading to an almighty defeat. I'm very concerned about that. We are at this stage going to lose a lot of brilliant Tory MPs, and I'm very worried about that. I believe the Prime Minister does need to change course. I believe he needs to...
And do what, though, exactly?
So, for example, on the Rwanda bill, I believe that he needed to introduce a law that would actually work, that would actually do what was necessary. Might be difficult or controversial, but necessary to block off the claims from people that... prevent us from deporting them, deal with the European Court of Strasbourg and human rights, which has stopped us from sending flights to Rwanda. Unfortunately, and we tried strenuously to improve the bill, the Prime Minister refused our attempts.
Why do you think that he refused your attempts?
You'd have to ask him.
What's your interpretation of events?
I think that, you know, there's a sense in government that we have to compromise and tweaking is sufficient.
Why do you think the government needs to compromise? Are they kowtowing to the One Nation caucus? Does he think that your attempts to strengthen the bill are too right-wing? What's the truth of this?
I mean, I think that, you know, what we were proposing to the Rwanda bill was to exclude individual claims, pretty much, you know, totally, and then also prevent the Strasbourg court from actually blocking flights from taking off. That would have been somewhat controversial amongst the international community, amongst certain sectors, the legal community, for example. And I think that there's a sense that we don't want to upset certain groups.
I mean, is there an argument, and it's a little bit sort of shades of Brexit, but that a bill is better than no bill?
I would have said that a few years ago, but we're now on our third bill. We passed the Nationality and Borders Act, and that fell short and didn't work. We passed the Illegal Migration Act. I introduced that. I had to accept compromises, and I'm afraid that's fallen short. We've now introduced a third bill, and I'm afraid it won't stop the boats. It won't fix this problem because it falls short, and I wasn't willing to bite my tongue on another occasion and just wave this thing through.
So when this bill comes back to the Commons, how will you vote?
Well, I've already voted against it.
So you predict
So I've lodged my opposition to it. I don't believe it will work, and I'm not willing to be complicit in a sham. I believe that the British people deserve better.
So you'll vote against?
I don't know how I'll vote in subsequent matters. I think that's actually immaterial. I've taken the very difficult decision to vote against it at third reading. I think that's a very strong sign of my concerns about the bill. And I think, you know, it's going to go through ultimately and, you know, time will tell whether it's going to be a success or not.
When Sir Simon Clarke went over the top, so to speak, were you cheering him on or having grave reservations about what he did?
Listen, I didn't know that Simon was going to say what he was going to say, and I have a huge amount of respect and admiration for Simon. He's an incredibly brave and, again, plain-speaking and honest politician. He's also one of the nicest people you'll meet in Parliament,
That sounds quite supportive of him, then, because he obviously got a lot of flack from other Tories in WhatsApp groups saying, you know, this was absolute madness. You can't replace a Prime Minister now, this close to the next general election. I mean, what do you think? Can you replace a Prime Minister this close to the next general election?
As I said, I think that's a pointless question. That's not going to happen.
No, I'd like an answer to it, though.
Rishi Sunak's going to be our Prime Minister into the next general election.
OK.
But what I do admire about Simon was his courage to speak out about a lot of the anxieties that many Tory MPs are feeling privately, many of our members feel, many of our supporters feel, which is a real anxiety about the state of the polls. We've got an open goal when it comes to fighting Labour. We're up against Keir Starmer, a man who has absolutely no principles whatsoever, who changes his mind on policy matters more than he changes his socks, who has no charisma, who would undo Brexit, who would open our borders to millions of migrants from the EU. And we're 20 points behind him.
Well, what
That's
do you put that down to?
inexcusable.
Because you've talked about Rishi Sunak's distinctive style of government, but equally perhaps you think that the Conservatives need to take the gloves off and take the fight to Labour more and be more aggressive.
Absolutely. I really feel that we should, on migration, for example, have chosen the tough, hard-headed and necessary measures on the Rwanda bill and actually force Labour to oppose our measures. I think on legal migration, again, the Prime Minister has resisted my attempts. For a year, I pleaded with him. We need a cap
So
on
are you
overall
saying
numbers.
that if the Rwanda bill comes back, not least if it's been amended in the Lords and all the rest of it, it hasn't been strengthened as you and Robert Jenrick and other colleagues had advised, you're saying that the boats won't stop and that we will continue to have a situation where foreign judges can sort of overturn domestic legislation?
I'm afraid that is my diagnosis after having served as Home Secretary, Attorney General and also worked in the field of immigration law for a decade as a barrister. This bill, it may get a token flight off here and there, but in order to actually deliver a deterrent effect, we need a large number of flights taking off regularly with a high number of passengers.
But then this isn't helpful, is it, to, as you say, a Prime Minister who's tanking in the polls? We saw from a Ipsos Mori survey in the week that only 20% of voters are satisfied with him compared to the 31% that were satisfied with John Major before 1997, and we know how that turned out. But then campaign director Isaac Levidow has said, I think probably quite wisely to Tory MPs, it's a case of unite or die. So you have to unite, don't you? And yet we hear, you know, your caucus of MPs on the right and others are constantly agitating. Perhaps you could argue that you're the wreckers here. You're the ones making it difficult for Rishi Sunak.
Listen, I think genuine disagreements on policy and expressing those disagreements is what a politician's job is. That's not infighting or disunity. I can't slavishly support something I fundamentally disagree with.
Yeah.
The British people deserve more than that. They deserve honest politicians. And I've tried as Home Secretary and I'll continue being honest for the British people, telling them where things are going wrong, urging the government to change course, because I want this Conservative government to win. I want us to beat Keir Starmer and I want us to deliver for the British people on migration, on policing, on extremism, on public safety.
What's the price of honesty, though? Because we've seen in the week Mike Freer having to stand down as the MP for Golders Green. He said he'd received death threats. I know you have a huge amount of abuse on social media. What's the current situation as far as you're concerned? Have you got more abuse since you stepped down? What's life like? Do you receive death threats?
Personally, I would say that on Mike Freer, I think it's a damning indictment on our society that one of the most upstanding and honourable members of our government and parliament has been hounded out of office because of Islamism and extremism, anti-Semitism and homophobia.
But have you been on the receiving end of similar threats?
Of course.
And
yes.
still now? I mean, more than ever? Or?
Yes, on a daily basis.
And how do you cope with that?
Listen, I am... unfortunately, it is the bread and butter of life in the public eye.
But do you have to have protection now? Because I know you leave office and you don't necessarily have protection. Have you had to retain some?
I have, yes.
Did you expect to have to do that?
No. Usually Home Secretaries lose their personal protection when they leave office, but I have been assessed and I'm very grateful to the parliamentary authorities who have afforded me ongoing protection.
Let's just talk about this case involving this chemical attack in Clapham. I suppose the first question on people's lips is, how do we have a situation where somebody is convicted of a crime, in this case a sex crime, and is still allowed to seek asylum in this country? Would you like to see... I know the current rule is that if you're found guilty of something and you're put in prison for a year or more, your asylum claim can be reversed and indeed you can be deported. But shouldn't we just have a blanket rule that if you're found guilty of any crime above a fixed penalty notice, you're out, you're sent home?
I agree, actually, and I think that this case illustrates major failings, and we need to wait for the review to confirm exactly what's gone wrong. But I think there are two elements here. There's the fact that we had a convicted sex offender who was allowed to stay in the country. We need to overhaul the rules relating to that. And secondly, I think the Church has many questions to answer about the role that they've played.
I mean, presumably this explosion in people at the last minute seemingly converting to Christianity did happen while you were Home Secretary, as well as in recent times. It's not just this case, but we've read of another couple in the papers this morning. What's going on here? Should people be allowed to claim Christianity as a reason for staying in the UK?
Well, I should say this person was granted asylum before I was Home Secretary. But what we've seen and what I became aware of was many churches around the country facilitating bogus asylum claims, effectively rubber stamping people who turn up to church and say they want to convert to Christianity, and that would be something that could bolster their asylum claim.
So what should be done? I mean, there may well be some people who have legitimately converted to Christianity and they do legitimately fear persecution if they return to their home country. How can we crack down on this? How can we police this?
Well, when I was Home Secretary, I set up a dedicated task force to look at some of the dubious practices that are going on to enable bogus asylum claims, whether it's, dodgy lawyers who facilitate fraudulent claims, whether it's other so-called professionals enabling this sordid business. And with more reporting, more investigations and tougher enforcement, they can be rooted out. And we did see a few results in that work. I urge the government to continue in earnest. But I do think as well, this thing about the Church and what we've seen over the last few days raises serious questions about the rigour with which the Church is applying their processes. It's also a gross insult to those genuine Christians who are devout and take their faith seriously when they see people traipse through the Church getting their certificate of verification or their letter from the priest only to disappear and get asylum granted. I think it's a very, very sad state of affairs.
I know you've also been critical of people like Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, sort of intervening on the Rwanda bill. Just in a one-word answer, should the clergy be intervening when it comes to political matters like Rwanda?
Listen, everyone can express themselves, but I do think that in some of these very important debates where issues like national security, public safety, border control are raised, that
should well be commenting, yes or no?
A bit more deference to government and executive decision-making is expected.
Let's just end on your own leadership hopes, if you still have them. There's a More in Common poll out today suggesting that Penny Mordaunt is the favourite to replace Rishi Sunak if or when the time comes. It says here, in a blow to Suella Braverman, a poll found that she is highly polarising. While 25% of 2019 Tory voters said she would make a good leader, beating Kemi Badenoch by 1 point, 53% said she would make a bad leader. Do these sorts of polls affect your sort of future hopes of one day leading the Tory party?
Goodness, listen, I served as Home Secretary. I'm grateful for that opportunity. I'm here really to champion Conservative values.
But does that mean at the helm one day?
Well, I'm not going to make any comment on what might happen in the future.
But you're not ruling it out, I can
tell. There's no leadership election. What we do face is a general election. At the moment, we're heading for an almighty defeat. My objective is to do whatever it takes to avert that, and I want to encourage the Prime Minister to change course.
Whatever it takes, though?
Yeah, I want us to adopt some policies that
potentially
stop
a leadership
the boats.
challenge?
Oh, no, absolutely not. No. I mean, listen, there is going to be no leadership challenge to Rishi Sunak before the general election. He's heading us, unfortunately, right now to a defeat. We need to do everything we can to avoid that. Let's get some policies that actually deliver for the British people, lowering migration, stopping the boats, getting some common sense policing, and actually restoring Britain to the rightful place that it deserves.
It's a good place to end, I think. Suella Braverman, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Still more to come. I'm going to be speaking to Lord Farmer, the former Tory donor, and asking him whether the Tory party has become family unfriendly. Stay tuned.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Up next, we're going to be getting the reaction live from our People's Panel in Graves. in Essex, not Graves. I don't know what I'm talking about. If you want to join the People's Panel and have your say in election year, don't forget you head over to www.gbnews.uk/People's Panel. Next week, we're hoping to be in the Northampton, Peterborough area, so please do check out the GB News website for more details. Well, we're going to be speaking to Lord Farmer, the former party treasurer, and indeed somebody who's been a champion of families, in just a moment. But I think we are now going to be speaking to Catherine Forster, who's going to give us the verdict from our People's Panel in Grays. Catherine, hopefully you can hear me. Your People's Panellists there would have heard both interviews, particularly the one with Braverman is the one that I'd like their reaction to, please.
Yes, indeed. Lots of interest and comments on what Suella Braverman had to say, but we're just quickly going to start with Paul, because thank you for asking the question to Gillian Keegan about financial education in schools. Paul, did she answer that question?
I think she fudged it. From personal experience, I know that it isn't happening in schools. It might be left up to individual heads to do something, but it really does need to be part of the national curriculum.
And what did you make of what Suella Braverman had to say?
I was pleasantly surprised at how frank she was. Very often politicians don't give straight responses, and I thought she was quite impressive in that respect.
Thank you. Steve? Suella Braverman, she had a long time to set out her stall.
Yeah.
Did she impress you?
No, she just danced around the question, which is nothing less than I expected, to be honest. Why use one word when you can use 50? And you know what their word was? Nothing. That's exactly what the Conservatives will do with these boat people coming in continuously. Absolutely nothing. If you want to stop the boats, we need your votes, Reform UK.
Yes, that's not really supposed to be a party political broadcast. I'll speak to you later. Terry, Suella Braverman, what did you make of what she had to say?
I felt she wasn't able to deal with the actual question itself because she has no actual power to change anything that needs changing. So many obstacles are in the way, brought about by the lawyers or politicians or interested parties, that she's never going to solve the problem. And certainly the Conservatives, I don't think, are going to get in because they're just too divided. Too many people have too many different interests.
Is there anything, briefly, given Labour are 20 points ahead in the polls, that the Conservatives could do to save themselves?
Possibly make themselves accountable to the electorate if the electorate don't agree, and at the moment they cannot be chastised by the public at all. They're free to do what they want.
I'm going to ask Paul as well.
I think the party is dead in the water, and it's for the Labour Party to lose the election. It's not for the Conservatives to win it. There's nothing they can do.
Steve, final word.
Completely beyond redemption, the Tory party. Completely.
There we have a very clear verdict from our panel here in Orsett in Essex. Back to you in the studio, Camilla.
Great job, Catherine. Thank you very much indeed. Don't forget, go to the GB News website to sign up for the People's Panel next week and for future weeks, because we want to give you your say, not least in election year. Joining me now is former Defence Secretary and my fellow GB News host, Michael Portillo. Michael, what's your take on Suella Braverman's comments earlier on the show? I'll be intrigued to know.
Good morning, Camilla. Well, more than anything that she said, I was struck by her manner. She is a conviction politician. She is someone who states clearly what she believes. She is very brave. The subject of the need for bravery amongst politicians is very much in the air at the moment, as we are seeing people being harassed out of public life. And Suella Braverman is a sticker. It's quite interesting to contrast her, I think, with Rishi Sunak or Jeremy Hunt. I mean, she just feels like a different sort of politician altogether. And following the election defeat, which I'm sure is what's going to happen, it will depend on what is the composition of the Parliamentary Conservative Party as to whether they go for a conviction politician like Suella Braverman or not. They also have Kemi Badenoch and Penny Mordaunt to choose from, who I think are also women and conviction politicians. So that is a very interesting choice. But of course, if the result of the defeat is that they go down to 160 members of Parliament, and many of those are in the middle of the party, then maybe none of those women will be the choice after all.
Indeed so. Michael, very, very briefly, because we're running out of time, who have you got coming up on the show at 11?
Well, we'll be talking about MP safety. We'll be talking about whether we can imagine any of our politicians leading us in a situation where we're getting close to war. And we'll be talking about Yorkshire puddings, because, as you know, Camilla, it is National Yorkshire Pudding Day.
Brilliant. Looking forward to it at 11. Thank you very much, Michael. Conservative peer and former Conservative Party Treasurer Lord Farmer joins me in just a moment. But first of all, let's go to the weather. Oh, no, we're not going to the weather. Sorry. No, we're not going to the weather. Sorry, false information. Let's bring Lord Farmer into the conversation immediately now. The weather can wait, Good. Lord Farmer, quite clearly.
Well, it's a bit miserable out there.
Now, I'm really interested, actually, just to contextualise what your point is on the Tories and family. Just, if you don't mind me asking about your family, because you had, a bit like me, I grew up with an alcoholic mother. I know that both of your parents were alcoholics, and I would imagine that when it comes to you calling now for family-friendly tax policies, particularly in the Tory party, that must have been born out of your experience having quite a difficult childhood.
Well, I would say definitely. Yeah, my father died when I was 4 of apparently a fall when he was drunk, and I think there may be some story at the back of that which I'm not aware of. But my sister and I grew up. We went from reasonably well off to bankruptcy to what happens to poverty, neglect and shame. Shame's a big thing. And my mother was alcoholic. She struggled. She wasn't healthy, and she actually did rather well. It was when I was about 15 that instead of being frightened of her, in a way, and living in a background of chaos, I was actually at a state boarding school, in a grammar school, which had stability, whereas my sister didn't. But it was when I was about 15 that it sort of had a little contretemps with her. We were watching TV and she was drunk and she was calling me four-letter words and things, but I suddenly felt sorry for her. And at that point, it sort of, the relationship changed, and I realised that the problems that were there, that were facing us all. And I think that sort of coloured my view ever since, that she needed help, and she needed some sensible care and strength behind her.
I mean, you had this really difficult childhood, then you go on to be hugely successful in business. You know, you're a now very wealthy man. I know you've got lots of different interests. In the interests of transparency, you're also a shareholder now of GBNews,
very happy
channel.
To be. Yeah.
You've got your fingers in quite a few pies, and that's happened against a backdrop of great adversity. So when it comes to looking at the Tory party now, I know you've previously been a donor. Will you still continue to donate? Because I know you're unhappy about particularly tax policy in this country. We're sort of unique in the Western world, aren't we, in that we tax couples individually rather than looking at household income when it comes to tax.
Exactly, yeah. In fact, on that point, I think if you look at Europe, I think we're almost the outlier. The Europeans either tax on total family taxation or transferable family allowances from one to the other. So we are an outlier. We live in a culture where governments, successive governments have actually sort of supported the individual rather than families. And I've been sort of saying family, family, family for a long time, but for one reason or another, you see very few supportive policies coming out of Labour or out of Conservative.
Why do we think this is? Because you've carried out this really interesting research. There's a poll that's found that 8 in 10 parents of dependent children think that they'd be more inclined to vote Conservative if the Conservatives come out with family-friendly tax policies.
Yeah.
So that seems to me to be a no-brainer, not least if you're 20 points behind. But why is there this sort of anti-family ethos?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I know the full reason for that. There is certainly an ethos of expressive liberalism. You can call it individual liberalism, whereby we live in a culture which says, you know, do what you like, do what you want to do, just don't hurt other people. The fact is, though, when you have a culture like that of individuals, you do hurt other people. Probably you hurt yourself in the long run, but you also hurt children, particularly, who aren't cared for when you have broken families. And we have one of the worst records for broken families in Europe as well.
I mean, I know you've got some stick in the past for talking about fatherlessness.
Yeah.
I mean, apparently we're not allowed to talk about fatherlessness and whether it leads to problems in society, whether it leads to crime and all the rest of it. What's your view on that?
Well, we should talk about fatherlessness. I mean, I didn't have a father, and I grew up with quite a lot of problems for a boy. You know, you don't know how to change an electric plug, sort of thing. You aren't guided, you aren't given a discipline of saying, no, don't do that, and yes, do this.
Although single mothers might argue, look, I'm actually better off without my feckless husband. There's lots of very strong single mothers who bring up perfectly decent civilians in this country, right?
I think the single mother is an icon which we bow down to, which we shouldn't. I'm sure most single mothers would like to have a loving man next to them to help them out with their children. There's no doubt about that. And single mothers struggle. And that's one of the reasons why we should have... I mean, this poll I've done is directed at Jeremy Hunt at the Treasury, saying, do a budget which is friendly for families. Because actually what my poll shows, it would affect how people vote quite big time.
Have you spoken to the Chancellor about it?
No, I haven't. We're going to present it to him.
And what do you expect the reaction might be?
Well, I've spoken to him before about family policies, and there's sort of been a quiet, gentle rejection. But I think you made a point some time about, you called it retail policies. This is a retail policy. Having a budget which is friendly for families is a policy which people will say, OK, actually, I might vote Conservative for that, because there's overwhelming support. And the funny thing is, in the 18 to 24-year-old grouping, it's the highest level of support. And I thought to myself, why is that?
Quite surprising, isn't it? But it's as if younger people want to have that stability and that fairness if they're in a couple. Presumably they aspire to own their own home, to start their own family, and they want to be advantaged because of that situation. I know you're a Rishi Sunak supporter. I mean, what do you make of the current state of things? His polling is terrible. His approval rating is worse, I think, than Johnson's during Partygate. He's never been seen as more competent, would you believe, than Liz Truss. But the party should stick with him, should they, Lord Farmer?
Well, I think we have to. And, I mean, I know Rishi. He works very hard. He's very detailed. I think he's done quite a lot of good things. He hasn't maybe got out there and taken it to Labour. He isn't fighting Labour. It's difficult to fight Labour when they have no policies to fight. I mean, they're very canny. I think, you know, they got the policy on aspiration where they're going to put VAT on school fees. But, I mean, apart from that, what else are they going to do? So I think it's difficult to fight. But, I mean, if he takes our recommendations on families and other retail policies, we've still got months before the election. Things change around very, very quickly. And actually, Starmer and the Labour Party, what are they offering? You know, so
take the fight to Labour as your conclusion, Lord Farmer.
Take the fight to Labour with retail policies like a family budget.
Brilliant. Lord Farmer, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Former party treasurer, GB News shareholder.
And supporter.
And supporter. Thank you very much. Well, I'll be back at 9:30 next Sunday. Michael Portello is up next. If you missed any of the show today, you can, of course, catch up with the highlights at 6 p.m. here on GB News. Have a great rest of your Sunday.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, very good morning to you. I'm Jonathan Vaughtry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It is quite a damp, drab and dreary start to Sunday for most of us, all thanks to this warm front that is slowly pushing its way north-eastwards across the UK, so particularly now for Northern Ireland, Northern England and into Scotland there is outbreaks of rain spreading their way in. Some drizzle also to contend with across Wales, southwest England, but generally for central eastern areas it will be a touch drier, reasonably cloudy, but a few sunnier breaks perhaps developing into the afternoon. Very blustery for many of us, some quite strong gusts around coast and over the hills, but those winds are coming in from a southwesterly direction, feeding in some very mild air for the time of year. It remains rather cloudy for much of Northern Ireland, England and Wales overnight, but we'll see persistent rain moving its way in for Scotland, particularly western districts turning very wet here. As it moves into some colder air ahead of it, we could see some hill snow, and the far north of Scotland will have a chillier night to come with a touch of frost, but elsewhere it is going to stay very mild indeed. For much of the southern two-thirds of the UK, again, it is going to be a fairly drizzly and cloudy day on Monday. Perhaps a few outbreaks of brightness poking their way through at times, but it really is Scotland that's going to bear the brunt of the most persistent rainfall. Some areas in the west perhaps seeing 120 millimetres build up by the end of the day. We hold on to that mild theme in the south throughout the rest of this week, but we'll see something a bit chillier